So today I'm going to be re-releasing one of my most popular podcast episodes. It's within the top 10 anyway, and it is gut health expert Dr. Nirala Jacobi. We talk about everything from how much protein you need in terms of gut health, the importance of fibre, everything related to gut health. Nirala Jacobi is a plethora of knowledge. She's an expert in the field of gut health, and those kind of people are hard to come by. She's been in the game for a few decades, to my knowledge, and you'll get a lot of value out of this episode, whether your goal is to, improve gut health or build muscle, overall health, anything. It's all in there. And as I say, you'll get lots of value out of this one. Before we get it rolling, I'd like to inform you that you can get your free guides, free fat loss fundamentals guide, free ab guide, and free fasting guides if you just head over to optimizeyourbody.com/free guides, or just go to the main homepage and you'll find them under programs. Also, I have an exclusive offer on, once again, because of popular demand on my training nutrition bundle. I now have released another exclusive offer, so you get the nutrition guide for free when you purchase my main training program, which on itself will get you insane results in terms of building muscle, fat loss, performance. But if you combine that with the nutrition, our nutrition fundamentals guides, then you're going to get insane results. And because of the amount of people I had purchase it last time, I've re-released the offer, and the offer ends very soon. Offer ends on the 15th of March. So don't miss out. Go over to optimizeyourbody.com, programs, and click nutrition and training bundle, or training nutrition bundle, to get the exclusive deal. I'm going to be taking the page down March 15th. And finally, don't forget to reach out to me on Instagram at Martin Silva Fitness. That's at Martin Silva. My surname is spelled S-I-L-V-A, Silva. Martin Silva Fitness. Give me a direct message. Let me know who you are. It'll be good to touch base with the listeners on a personal level. Enjoy. Hey, welcome to Optimize Your Body with Martin Silva, where we talk raw, uncut facts to truly help you optimize your body. Hey folks, so I have another very interesting guest on today. Her name is Dr. Nirala Jacobi, and she is a gut specialist, gut health specialist, and specializes mainly in SIBO, which we'll come to very soon. But she's very, very well versed, and she's an expert in her field. So there's going to be lots of sound advice here for you guys. So, how are you doing today, Nirala?
I'm great. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Yeah. So, if you could just explain. I was just going to get straight into it because I know your time is limited, and I was just going to see if you could just explain in layman terms, kindly, what the gut is and like what its main functions are, I guess, or whatever's easier for you, really.
Yeah, sure. Let's kind of start with a healthy gut, if you will. But we all know that the gut is really important. It's there to help us digest our food and actually absorb nutrients and make us healthy, and basically extract as much nutrients from the food as possible. So, and my function really is to help people with digestive disorders, whether that's IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, or SIBO, which is a bacterial overgrowth in the upper gut, or constipation, diarrhea, etc. And it's when we think about digestive health, we have this incredibly long tube that's essentially, if you were to yank it out of your body and spread it out, it's the surface area of a double tennis court. And that is inside of you trying to extract as many nutrients as possible. And if that's not working, no matter how hard you work out, you're just not going to be optimally healthy. So gut health is sort of a new buzzword with a lot of researchers looking at the microbiome, for example, and healthy eating, of course, has been very popular for many years, but it just seems like more and more people are actually interested in digestive health, which is music to my ears, of course, because I've been preaching this for over 20 years. So, yeah, it's a good day to be a gut health specialist.
Awesome. Yeah, it's very, very exciting. And I'm so excited to have you on the show, to be honest, because it's only over the last year or two where I've really started focusing on health and well-being, as opposed to just be driven by aesthetics because of my bodybuilding background. And yeah, I've just read some books on it. And I was going to ask you on that note there, kind of like, I guess it's a broad question, but what signs like people should look out for, which could indicate they have gut issues or food intolerances? I know that's quite a broad question, but yeah.
No, it's a great question, because that's exactly the kind of thing that people don't often actually think about. Food allergies, for example, when they have eczema, or if they have some sort of bacterial overgrowth and they have psoriasis. But the most common symptom that I think also pertains to your listeners, because I have a lot of not just bodybuilders, but people really into their physique. And bloating, I think, is probably one of the most common symptoms, which is, of course, such a difficult thing to overcome if you're actually competing and you're on stage and you have this little pot belly that people really get very stressed out about that. So bloating after meals is probably one of the most common complaint. It doesn't sometimes even have to be after meals. It can just be sort of worsening as the day progresses. And that could range, the symptoms of that or the causes of that could range from that you're just eating too much protein for your particular body type. And I know that protein is a very valued, food source for most of the bodybuilders, but if you don't have a particular constitution that allows you to really process and digest that correctly, which usually starts in the stomach with hydrochloric acid, and then as that protein, let's say you had a steak, you have to first break that down with stomach acid, then that gets passed into the small intestine where the pancreatic enzymes act upon it. And so as it traverses down this long tube, essentially, by the time it reaches the colon, not much should be left of that steak. But if you've overwhelmed your ability to break that down, you will have some of that steak left in the colon, and you can have it putrefy there. So very often bloating is the result. Brain fog can be the result. Really smelly gas can be the result. So those are the kinds of symptoms that very much are associated with just basically, it could be anything. Could be that you've overwhelmed your digestive tract with protein. It could be that you just generally don't have enough digestive juices. It could be that you have bacterial overgrowth. So this is my job, is where I then ferret out what exactly the problem is.
Oh, great. And I was just going to ask you about, in terms of protein, that's great that you mentioned that, because whilst I was competing and also just constantly dieting down and stuff for different modeling shoots and whatnot, I was just pumping and even when I wasn't doing that, actually, I was uneducated like most people, and I was pumping my body. I was having probably 3-4 times the amount of protein I needed, and that was literally for probably about 3 or 4 years. And I'm pretty certain I've done some damage to my gut, because it's very ironic, actually, but my gut's been absolutely great for quite some time now. But actually, yesterday I had a flare up, and today it's really, really bad. And I'm trying to put my finger on what it is. And for a while, I was having major issues about 6 months to 12 months ago. So yeah, in terms of eating too much protein, I mean, what would you say? How would you explain to the listeners, like, I know everyone's different, and it depends on what their lifestyle is and stuff. But how much is too much?
Well, again, it depends on your weight and on your size. And if you, typically men do require a small amount more than women in terms of muscle mass. But, when I see bodybuilders or people that are in competitions, they basically just live off of protein. And so if you have, 100 grams of chicken breast in the morning, and then whey protein for, 2-3 snacks a day, and then animal products all the way throughout, and you're getting maybe 200 grams of protein, that's way too much for your body to actually process. And so the idea is you only going to build muscle with protein that you can actually absorb. So it doesn't matter how much you douse your body with protein. If you cannot digested, you're not going anywhere with that protein. And it's interesting that you talk about that, because a lot of bodybuilders are still of that notion that you have to just protein. So it's really nice to hear that you actually don't advise your listeners to follow suit. You basically still, you do require a bit more protein if you're obviously wanting to get the results, but it's always within reason. I know vegan bodybuilders that don't eat a fraction of some of the others. But again, I'm not an expert in exercise fitness. I'm more looking at digestive health. So like 200, 300 grams of protein for somebody that has a cast iron stomach acid, that might be fine digestively. I would argue that also if you eat 200 to 300 grams of protein a day, pure protein, not like 300 grams of chicken breast, that your body becomes too acidic, because animal protein tends to be very, very acidic. And what that means is it actually increases the acidity of your blood. And when that happens, your body actually, in order to buffer the acidity of the blood, has to pull out minerals from your bones. And so what we see is we see a much higher level of osteoporosis in cultures that, like Western countries that eat a lot of animal products. So my golden rule is always, if you eat a lot of animal protein, you must also eat the equivalent, if not much more, vegetable protein or vegetable matter. So if you have a steak, on a third of your plate is the steak, the other 2/3 should be vegetables, just to even out the playing field. Because when we look back in what we used to do in Paleolithic times, is it wasn't just the paleo diet. It was meat, yes, but then we went through long periods of where we didn't have that available, and we would eat tubers, we would eat lots and lots of fiber, we'd eat lots of vegetables, and so that meat was always counterbalanced with a very huge amount of vegetables that contain a lot of potassium and a lot of other nutrients that really buffer out this acidity, which is a big issue for some people. So if you, for example, are somebody who gets very sore after exercise, you might actually just be too acidic, because lactic acid, of course, is also another acid factor that increases acidity. So, if you can't get over being sore, like your teammate, you might think that you might just have to really increase your vegetable consumption.
Yeah, interesting. And talking about vegetables, as I've said time and time again on this podcast, it was an absolute game changer when I started increasing the amount and also varying the amount of plants I was eating. Everything just changed. I mean, I went from kind of having a really bad relationship with food to actually my body intuitively goes for those foods now, for vegetables. Like broccoli is my go-to. I know it's a very kind of that's a very conventional kind of thing for a bodybuilder to eat, but that's just an example. And I was going to say how I know fiber plays a huge part in gut health and longevity when it comes to just all-round health. How important is fiber? And could you briefly maybe explain the different types of fiber in layman's terms, and like maybe some examples of some food sources, if possible? I know that was tough. I asked you about 10 questions in one sentence. Sorry.
Sure.
The importance of fiber. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Where do we go? Okay. All right. So fiber is, and it is really important, but it's actually interesting because my area of expertise and specialty is IBS and SIBO. And for SIBO, we're actually trying to minimize fiber. We'll get to that. But let's go back to why are we all talking about vegetables and fibers? It's because you have about 3 kilos of gut bacteria in your system right now. So if you just took out 3 kilos of you, that would be the amount, the sheer volume of bacteria that inhabit mainly your large intestine and to some extent in much lesser amount your small intestine. And what do they do there? They are incredibly important to help you with nutrient absorption, nutrient production. They ferment different fibers into what are called short-chain fatty acids like butyric acid and propionate. And a whopping 20% of your daily energy is actually produced by these bacteria that are living in your digestive tract. So these bacteria we want to help them grow, right? We want to help them actually build sort of like a rainforest in your digestive tract that has this really important function of gut healing, immune stimulation, also energy production, as I've mentioned. So a lot of different reasons why we want a healthy microbiome. And the microbiome is the term given to this huge amount of bacteria that live in your gut. And if you feed it nothing but meat and fat, you will grow much more the phylum called Bacteroidetes, which are a particular type of phylum that actually increase they love meat and they love fat and things like that. So you really change with your diet what your microbiome looks like. So if you feed them a lot more vegetables, you have a lot more diversity in your microbiome. And diversity is the name of the game when we're talking about a healthy gut bacteria. So fibers and plant materials is really what we have co-evolved with our microbiome. So that's their preferred food is vegetable plants or vegetable matter in terms of fiber. So we have soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, and both of those are really helpful. The insoluble fiber, which is mostly cellulose, the hard stem, the skin on the stem of the broccoli, for example, that's a little bit harder to digest for humans. And so, but it's still pretty good for particular bacteria, but it also acts as a bulking agent for your stool so that you can actually have a nice, big, normal bowel movement. But the insoluble fiber, which is found more in apples and in other vegetables. I mean, lots of vegetables have both soluble and insoluble fiber, but the insoluble fiber is an excellent prebiotic, which is a food for beneficial bacteria. And if you get really, really gassy, if you are eating a lot of fiber, it means that all of a sudden they're having a party and you might have to cut back a little bit. Because the idea is not to get really symptomatic with gas, but the idea is just to have the right amount of fiber for your digestive tract so you can grow this healthy microbiome.
Awesome. And have you got any examples of, vegetables, for example, and is there any other kinds of foods you promote to people? I don't know, such as I know people say that lentils and kind of legumes are really important. What would you say are the top of the list? I know vegetables are probably number one, or plants, but...
Well, legumes and rice and grains are all plant-based, right? So you can sort of argue that all of that is that you have basically plants and non-plants, right? So you have, all the animal products are now non-plants. So all the plants are very helpful, and most of them do have some what are called, well, not just fibers, but also phytonutrients, which are vitamins and nutrients found only in plants. And fibers, I think the probably star of the show would definitely be legumes. They're extremely rich in fiber.
So legumes such as, just to give the audience, sorry.
Like black beans, for example. Okay. Black beans are fabulous. And so, if you want to just sort of transition maybe replace some of the foods that you're eating now with plants or with fibrous vegetables and legumes, you can do things like, celery sticks with hummus, for example, is a great snack, or using, I like Mexican food, so things like the black beans, you can get them in tins or cans, and you would sort of drain the water out, and you can sprinkle, just even starting slowly, usually with legumes and lentils and beans, because they are very gas forming in those that are not used to it. But as you build up your tolerance, that should get easier and easier. And other, like celery is a great plant or vegetable that has a lot of fiber. You mentioned broccoli, all of the brassica vegetables, the cauliflower, broccoli, kale, they're all fabulous with fiber. And then the grains, if you're looking at brown rice, quinoa, anything that's still in its whole form is really good to incorporate as well into your diet.
Awesome. You explained that really well. Thanks for that. Yeah, so just move forward a little bit. Could you, actually, I wanted to go a bit more into what you specialize in actually in SIBO, and what are the most common, obviously I know you specialize in SIBO, but what are the most common gut disorders or digestive disorders that you deal with, Nirala?
Okay, so obviously because my website is the SIBO doctor, it's going to be my specialty, and I've dealt with SIBO when it first started to hit the alternative medicine airwaves and also the conventional airwaves. And the conventional airwaves in terms of gastroenterologists, they're still woefully behind when it comes to actually taking SIBO seriously. But in a nutshell, maybe a lot of people have heard of irritable bowel syndrome, where you have cramping, you have gas, you might have diarrhea, you might have constipation or alternating bowel patterns, some day diarrhea, some day constipation, and you just feel like you're mostly unsettled all the time. And for the longest time, patients were told to just eat fiber and live with it, but fiber would make them actually worse. And so SIBO is a condition that is part of the spectrum of IBS. And it's basically where bacteria that are normally found in your large intestine. I've just talked about how the microbiome is really important in your large intestine, and to some extent in much smaller amount in the small intestine. But basically, SIBO is a condition where you have tremendous bacterial overgrowth in the wrong location. And that really leads to malabsorption. It leads to tremendous bloating and abdominal cramping, lots of fatigue, lots of brain fog. Maybe you have diarrhea, maybe you have constipation, or again, the alternating back and forth. And so still a lot of gut symptoms, but it's a really treatable condition, because essentially if we figure out what caused it and then killing the bacteria, that's curable. That is what we're going for. And so a lot of people that have suffered with this condition for a long time are, finally able to eat normally again and live a normal life, even though they were stuck in their house for many years because of these digestive disorders. So that part is really fun and really rewarding. But people have either mild cases or intermediate cases or really, really tough cases. So I deal with that whole spectrum. But yeah, SIBO you can take a quiz. If you go to SIBOtest.com, there is a quiz just to see if you have SIBO. And it can give you an idea whether or not you fit the category, if any of what I've just said sort of rings a bell for you.
Yeah, so it's obviously a lot more common, I guess, than what people think, because, as you say, it's like a new age now. And with all the studies coming out and all the time and effort you put into applying yourself and learning about this, I guess now is a great time for you to actually, reach out and help people, because a lot of the time, I guess, people can't kind of connect the dots because it's so complex, isn't it? And people think that. Anyway, on that note, I was just going to say, before I go off on a tangent and kill this off, I was just going to say the link between the gut and the brain. Now, the new studies are linking, obviously with the vagus nerve, is it, or the vagus nerve or something?
The vagus nerve. That's right.
That's right. And obviously, we're facing an epidemic of mental illness, but there's going to be heaps of different factors which come into that. But inflammation and stuff like that, there's quite a big link, right, between the gut and the brain. So
huge.
Yeah, huge. So what's your viewpoint on that? And what have you had any experiences?
So, for sure, and this is one of the most rewarding things in my line of work, because I've been a naturopathic doctor now for over 20 years, and that's our, bread and butter, basically, the gut. We basically are taught from very early on that the gut is the root of pretty much all illness. And so way back then, we were still being ridiculed for this notion, and to actually see it come into fruition that everybody basically agrees with, one of the most oldest of naturopathic tenets, is just extremely rewarding in and of itself. So that part is awesome. But really what we're finding is that if you can imagine that, your gut is really the root of everything, but 80% of your immune system basically lives in your digestive tract, right? So take that in for a moment, and that you are every day, every time you eat something, you are in the process of turning a foreign subject into cells and things that make you work. So that alone is pretty miraculous. So, I actually forgot your question now, because I'm always like, what was the question?
No, I see you're passionate about it. That's fine. I always do that. I was just going to say real quickly then, so it sounds like it becomes a part of you then. That bacteria actually becomes a part of you then, by the sounds of it.
Well, no, the bacteria don't, but we have a symbiotic relationship with these organisms, right? Meaning that they do things for us and we do things for them. We are the host. We feed them, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea of brain health is where we were going with that. But what we are finding through science, and some of you may have heard this already, but a few years ago, scientists completed what's known as the Human Genome Project, right? Where we actually looked at, all right, humans are the most complex beings on the planet. How many genes do we actually have? And we expected millions of genes, but turns out that we have just about as many as the potato, right? We actually have as many genes as a regular white potato, which was absolutely stunning to scientists. It's something like 20 to 40,000 genes we have. Right. So what then came along is the Human Microbiome Project, which looked at bacterial DNA. And what they found is that bacteria far outnumber, or the bacterial DNA far outnumbers the human DNA. So essentially, we're just like, you remember that Men in Black movie where there's a human being and then actually the brain opens up and there's a tiny alien. That's what I always think about in this, it's sort of like controlling the human being. And in a way, bacteria also are thought to actually control a lot of human function, including inflammation and, signals to the brain through the vagus nerve. It's a bidirectional, so it's not just gut-brain, but also brain-gut. So we have a lot of information going back and forth and constantly sampling. Additionally, we have really aggressive bacteria in the gram-negative group that in their cell wall have substances that are some of the most inflammatory substances known to man. So if you have a lot of those bacteria and you feel depressed, you're achy all over, or just randomly achy, and sort of just not firing on all cylinders, it's very possible that actually comes from your gut. And the antidepressant you're taking is not really working for you.
That's it, because and what would you say because there's so many kind of factors which come into it, right, when it comes to mental health, and it's so complicated. But I've got so many questions all at once, but I'm just gonna say that when it comes to inflammation, I've read a really good book recently called Inflamed Mind. And it's really, really fascinating. But what I've noticed is, because I've just using competitions again as an example, now I've connected the dots. But I've done competitions and modeling shoots where I haven't focused as much on the nutrients I'm eating. I've just purely been focused on calories, and I haven't been eating as clean, if you like. I've been eating a bit more, factoring in some processed foods and whatnot. And my stomach looks completely different. It's now looking back, I realize it was inflammation. But when I was eating, whenever I went into a show and I was dialed and eating super, nutrient dense foods, it was night and day the difference in how my actual midsection looked. So it goes to show that inflammation is actually, quite common. Yeah, it plays a big part in things, even with brain health.
It's inflammation, but I would also say that, it's really common for people to reach for highly processed foods like energy, like the energy drinks, and they're super dense with fat and with sugar and things like that, or those instant meal drinks and adding in all kinds of stuff to their protein shake and a lot of sugary stuff. And if you get a lot of bloating with sugar, that could very well also mean that you have a fungal overgrowth. I see a lot of people that as kids, for example, they may have had tons of ear infections or asthma or chest infections, and they got antibiotic after antibiotic. And then as they got older, they got onto this health kick and they started to clean up their diet. And here they are, they're really into fitness, but they still get a lot of sugar cravings and they have bloating with sugar. And I would say a lot of that can be yeast overgrowth, because anytime you take an antibiotic, which is sometimes important, but way overprescribed, even by conventional standards. They're starting to really scale back the amount of antibiotics that GPs and doctors are prescribing, simply because we're seeing so much resistance now with bacteria not responding appropriately to antibiotics. But basically, anytime you take an antibiotic, you are killing off a large number of normal bacteria that are there to do their job, as well as the pathogens, right? The ones that you're trying to target. And then in its place, you can actually have a yeast growth, which is not affected by the antibiotics. And so yeast, I see that just as commonly, if not more commonly, in people with digestive disorders. And brain fog is very common. Fatigue is very common. Also joint pain, and that's less due to the inflammation, but more due to the what we call endotoxins, or substances that yeast can release, like tartaric acid, etc., that can actually deplete certain nutrients from your body. So it gets really fascinating, way beyond just inflammation, when we actually look at what's happening when somebody has a yeast overgrowth.
And would you recommend any, again, I know there's lots of variables here, but in terms of pro-inflammatory foods, for example, right? Like vegetable oil. I mean, there's lots of research to show that actually certain types of vegetable oil, once they cook them, turn into a trans fat, which can be extremely inflammatory on the gut. So is there any foods which you think are like pro-inflammatory in general? Or not necessarily, or just like bad for your gut in general? Sorry.
Yeah, so not just gut, because, I mean, the gut, I think that it's not going to be, the foods that I'm going to mention are not just going to be bad for the gut, but basically bad for anyone. And trans fats would definitely be top of my list, because they're so damaging to pretty much all cells, because the cell wall is made out of lipids or fats, right? So if you actually start replacing some of those fats with trans fats, it's really bad news, right? So that would be, like you mentioned, vegetable oils that are solid at room temperature, like margarine and so forth. And also just vegetable oils that you cook with. It's not a good idea. Olive oil is the exception. That's really good, very healthy. And coconut oil, of course, as well. But also in moderation. I'm not a huge fan of just ladling coconut oil into the smoothies and stuff. I think that's really unnecessary. So other foods would include, top of the other list would be sugar, any kind of processed sugar, any sort of processed food that has a lot of white flour, vegetable fat, and sugar, right? So most of the commercial cakes and lollies, that type of thing, is just not very healthy at all.
What about the common go-to foods? Sorry to interrupt. Like, the foods like cereal, bread, pasta. People are still in the habit of eating those kind of foods, but those kind of things can be bad as well, right?
Sure. That's still processed. Like, look at cornflakes. That's completely processed.
I know.
So, you're talking to a naturopathic doctor. It's a long time since I've even smelled a cornflake,
Yeah, no, I know.
Eat that. So I don't eat, it's so foreign to me, but most of my patients luckily don't do that. So instead, start your day, like a great day would be to have a protein shake for breakfast. By all means, have a protein shake, and maybe use not always whey protein, which is from a cow, but use also plant-based proteins like hemp protein or golden pea, which is a really good vegetable or vegetarian type of, or vegan really, protein, but make sure it's a really good source, and mix it with maybe organic, almond milk or something like that. There's a lot of fillers in a lot of these milk alternatives, but you can easily make your own by just having, throwing a handful of cashews or almonds into a blender and then add water, for example. That's easy. And some frozen berries or fresh berries. Berries are really very much packed with, or the blue skin is really packed with phytonutrients and substances that are really anti-inflammatory. So, but ideally you want to have berries that are colored all the way throughout, like elderberries, which are difficult, of course, to find commercially. But, the blueberries that are commercially grown, that are white inside, are going to be less healthy or less vibrant as the what are they called? The they're not elderberries, it's totally escaping me right now. It'll come back to me. But you can buy all sorts of berries. Raspberries are great because they're red all the way throughout. So really, really colorful vegetables is what you want. Vegetables and fruit. And I'm much more of a vegetable person than a fruit person, just because it's you can pack so much more nutrient density into vegetables, and the sugars are just an issue with fruit. And if you have like 10 fruit a day, that's just too much, because your liver can't handle that much fructose. Yeah. So.
And what would you say in terms of vegetables? Like, what would you recommend the average person in terms of servings of vegetables per day? I know it's broad, but.
Right. And so what I can tell you is what science tells us, right?
Yep.
So if you actually reach the goal, which is always my personal goal, and I'm pretty close to it, and most days I meet it, is 10 cups of vegetables a day. Right?
Yep.
So 10 cups of vegetables, what we know from research is that practically every disease known to us is going to be curbed by that, right?
Wow.
So any chronic illness, cancer, I mean, we can't say that just eating 10 cups of broccoli every day is going to do that, but the chances are pretty good. So especially if you, and we're just talking about minimizing risks, right? But if you think about heart disease, hypertension, everything that we know of is can be really helped by eating more vegetables. As simple as that sounds, but it's true.
Yep.
And the more colorful, the better. So really eating a rainbow, eating your tomatoes, eating your carrots and purple carrots and all kinds of different vegetables, rather than always the store-bought flavor saver tomato, which is not the same as an organic tomato that you buy at a farmer's market. Of course, that's not available to everyone, but do the best you can.
Exactly.
And buy your vegetables. There's a great website called the EWG.org, the Environmental Working Group.org, which is a nonprofit group that looks at the effects of toxins on our bodies. And so they always have a great list called the Clean 15.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
The Dirty Dozen, right? The Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, which are 15 vegetables that you, the Dirty Dozen is a list of vegetables that you really should eat organic. And that's like apples, I think celery is in there, those kinds of things. And then the Clean 15 are foods that you can get away with not really buying organic, and that's like avocado.
Yeah, with the thick skin and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And bananas, maybe.
Yeah. So start there, just maybe if your goal is to become healthier in 2019, then maybe starting to eat more vegetables. Now, if you bloat with vegetables, then maybe you have some digestive issue that can be remedied. You might need more enzymes, or you might have SIBO, or, so don't be discouraged if you think, well, I can't handle vegetables, I'm just too reactive. There is an answer for that.
Exactly, and that's it. And if it's a listener, a lot of the listeners I know,
sense.
Oh yeah, that makes total sense. And a lot of the people listening, I guess, well, not a lot of them, but some of them probably don't eat any vegetables. So I would just say, even if you were to start off with like 4 or 5 cups, that's a small win, right? So just gradually trying to build that up, isn't it, and getting used to eating them, I guess.
It's it's right. And so if you want to know, like, what are the best maybe 3 vegetables to start with, I would definitely put broccoli in that list. Broccoli is a fantastic vegetable. I also think tomato, and with tomato, it's actually great if you cook it. It does release a bit more nutrients and stuff,
on that note.
lutein.
Oh, sorry, go on. What does it release? Sorry about that. I didn't realize. What were you saying then? It releases...
like lutein and, there's different types of nutrients that are in tomatoes, but they're really good for eyesight and circulation and things like that, there's so many vegetables that are wonderful. And then obviously, vegetables like kale, there can be a little bit harder to digest, but things like, carrots are wonderful, celery is wonderful. So start with the really simple ones, and then maybe graduate to shiitake mushrooms, or
exactly.
Those kinds of things. Yeah.
Start broadening the horizon a bit. Yeah, no, I was going to say, what's your thoughts on, like, for example, the nightshade family, such as tomatoes, eggplant, I don't know, white potato, and like capsicum? Because I've heard they contain certain like proteins. Maybe is it lectins, which can be toxic on the gut and stuff like that. Is that something?
Right?
Because I sometimes get issues. I'm just trying to put my finger on stuff myself. That's all.
Yeah. So this is not a new thought. I know that recently it's been popularized by someone who has actually a financial gain in selling supplements that are supposedly lectin shields, right?
Surprise.
I think that it's really doing a disservice to vilify vegetables by saying, oh, they have all these toxins in it. We've known about the nightshade family, or the Solanaceae, that contain solanine, which is actually also a particular type of food substance that in those that are sensitive can cause symptoms. And, just like with histamine intolerance or salicylate sensitivities, like lots of different sensitivities. But we have co-evolved with these vegetables, right? So they are very familiar to us. We've had tomatoes for a while now, and potatoes. I mean, yes, they've migrated through different areas, and not everyone's had potatoes for hundreds of thousands of years. But for all intents and purposes, I think that to think that you should take a supplement before you can handle a vegetable, I just think that's crazy.
It's a joke.
So so I don't really subscribe to that idea, but I do know that for some people it can cause joint pain, like potato. Can do that. All the vegetables that you mentioned are part of the nightshade. So if you have joint pain or some other issues, whenever you eat eggplant, tomato, and potato, and capsicum or peppers, for those of you listening in America, then just maybe take that food group out for a while and see how you do without it. I think that's important, but I think they're wonderful vegetables that I want to live without.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think it's very important when it comes to, like, say, for example, someone's eating no vegetables. I think the least of their worries is eating a tomato, right? So
exactly.
I was just going to say, in terms of poor gut health, do you think there's a link to, I know once again, like it's lifestyle factors, for example, people don't, they eat more calories than their body needs and the wrong types of foods and maybe not moving enough. But do you think poor gut health can lead or can contribute to obesity and chronic illness?
Sure. We know that without a shadow of a doubt. And we know that because through different areas of research. But for example, one sort of therapy that's gaining popularity is called fecal microbiota transplants, right?
I've heard of
Which
that.
is basically putting the poo of a healthy person into the body of a sick person. So it's done through a colonoscopy where they actually put the poo into the colon of a sick person, and they have cured certain diseases, right? So there's a condition called C. difficile diarrhea, which is very common if you get antibiotics in the hospital. It's really very violent diarrhea, and it's a 98% cure rate if they take the poo of a healthy person and put it into the colon of that unhealthy person. So, basically they're translocating the healthy microbiome to a sick microbiome. But what they also found in that research is that if they take these are my studies, but they take the microbiome of an obese mouse and put it into a thin mouse, and the thin mouse will get fat because and no changes in diet. So we do know that there are a lot of aspects to the microbiome and certain aspects of what they produce, what are called obesogens, right? Obesogens are either effects of bacteria, so like, for example, Methanobrevibacter smithii, which is an organism, not really a bacteria, but a really interesting creature that slows transit, right, through the gut. And the purpose of that was so that you could extract more calories, which was evolutionarily very, very advantageous, right? It was very good for people that were starving to actually extract more calories from food. But of course, it's havoc for anyone living in the Western world.
Absolutely.
With a calorie excess,
Yeah.
So that those links definitely we know are very real for people.
I was going to mention that. I'm glad you mentioned that, the studies with rats or mice or whatever with the, it's crazy, changing the gut flora, and the other mouse was then obese without actually changing anything else. It goes to show, I know obviously it's not done in humans, but we're very similar, I guess, in terms of our DNA. What in terms of rats, just so the listeners know, like, I don't know if you know, but what are we in terms of our DNA? Are we we're very close to a rat with our DNA, right?
We're pretty much close to, if you think that we're very similar to a potato, we're not too far away from
couch potatoes, yeah.
Yeah, but they're a little bit of a different brand. Rodents are different from, are a little bit different from humans in certain aspects. But we're super close to chimps and apes in general. I don't know the exact number of DNA similarities, but it's got to be more than a potato, I would think. That's
okay then. I was just curious.
Mammals, right? We're still mammals, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's just because I've mentioned certain studies before, and people are like, yeah, well, they haven't been done in humans. It's just rats, so it's absolute bullshit.
Oh, they have been done anecdotally. in humans, So I have heard, and there are a lot of case studies of people doing FMT or fecal microbiota transplant that get depressed afterwards, and the donor was depressed, So there's a lot of different aspects of it that I think we're just, it's too new, that the modality is too new to really extrapolate a lot of data from across, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to understand it a lot better. But yeah, so there are a lot of things that I see, people that have done FMTs, because I see a lot of people that have failed FMT come to me. And so the things that they tell me, is very interesting that they've experienced after FMT.
Interesting. And I was just going to say about stress and stuff, because most of, a lot of people this day and age, I guess we're more kind of stressed than ever now, because we're overstimulated, with technology and stuff, and just the lifestyle, the poor lifestyle, having more food available to us than ever at any point in human history is playing a part on stress. But stress, I guess, plays a big part as well. Do you notice a link between? I know this stress is a very wide word, if you like, but that plays a part. Do you find in some people in terms of their gut disorders, or?
It's probably the number one cause of gut disorders. I'm not saying the stress has caused it, but it's the number one contributing factor, what I see in chronic gut issues. And if you think that we have two phases in our nervous system, right? Or responses. You've heard of the fight or flight.
Yes.
But there's also another one called rest and digest, right? And these are all automatic sort of nervous system responses that are sort of imperceptible to us in a way. I mean, we know when we're stressed, when we go into fight or flight, and that is an ancient response to really life-threatening situations that we had to run away from, but they didn't last all day. They lasted maybe 10 minutes or a half an hour, or you actually died, right? So it was only really, really short spurts during the day that you were exposed to the fight or flight. But nowadays, with so much stress, so much worry, so many different stimuli, as you've mentioned, we're in that fight or flight much, much more and much longer. And what happens is, basically, the physiology is that when you are in a fight or flight, your body wants to get ready to run, right? Your body wants to basically run away from the perceived threat and get rid of anything that it doesn't need. So if you've ever been nervous before a competition or before public speaking and you had diarrhea, that's what that is. It's basically just, getting rid of the ballast, so, and you are then able to run or to get away from the perceived threat. The rest and digest is the complete opposite. And that's when we're actually, secreting digestive juices and really allowing our body to extract nutrients. In the fight or flight, you actually do not make very much stomach acid at all. And your body is not prepared for food. So imagine if you're very busy and you have, 10 minutes for a lunch break and you're wolfing down your lunch and you're still really stressed. You're not really optimizing digestion that way at all. So I do think that chronic stress is probably one of the most important aspects of gut health, or the lack thereof.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I like the way you put that. I never thought of it like that. When you get diarrhea and stuff like that, and when you're nervous, it's because your body's trying to get rid of the waste for you to do a runner, basically.
Yeah.
Before like that.
Literally, you're doing a runner.
You're literally doing a runner. Yeah, no pun intended there. I was going to say about fermented foods as well. Is there any particular types of fermented foods you recommend? I know, once again, it depends on what kind of disorder your clients have and stuff. And I don't know whether that plays a part in SIBO, but are there any fermented foods which you kind of toy around with yourself, or?
Look, I am a huge fan of fermented foods. Fermented foods, basically, if it's vegetable type of fermented food, like sauerkraut and the different types of fermented vegetables that are available now, it's mostly Lactobacillus plantarum, which is a type of probiotic that is wonderful for a lot of different reasons, and it's actually a very researched strain of a species of probiotic. So I like that. I like sauerkraut juice. I like like anything fermented. I like miso, yogurt. I like all of it. Yogurt and animal products contain more bifidobacteria, which is often really colonic. Has a lot of role in colonic issues like constipation and stuff, although dairy can be quite constipating. So, everybody is really different. And I can't say categorically that yogurt is more for the colon and sauerkraut is more for small intestinal stuff. But fermented foods do play a role, and eating more fermented foods can really help. Now, one thing I will say about your microbiome, which again are all the beneficial bacteria that have sort of symbiotically evolved with you, they cannot be replaced by fermented foods or capsules of probiotics. That's a misconception of sort of, for the longest time we thought we just reseed the digestive tract with probiotics after antibiotics and just give it what it needs. Well, that's not really how it works. You have your own native species that you cultivate throughout your life. And if you lose them, you have to cultivate them back. You have to use foods and prebiotics, like we've mentioned, the bit different fibers, to actually help your own microbiome to come back. You can't just take something from a capsule or something from a jar and imagine that it's going to repopulate your own microbiome. That just simply does not happen. But probiotics are great for particular immune modulation. They're basically metabolic modulators, I would say, and they are really helpful in promoting the growth of certain organisms, but they cannot replace what you've lost.
Could you recommend any kind of probiotics? Because I don't know if you've heard of modbiotics as well. Have you heard of modbiotics?
Never heard of it.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'm not, but just bear in mind that I use extremely professional brands and strain-specific, very strain-specific probiotics. And so, there's some that are far more researched than others, like Lactobacillus plantarum 299V is an incredible probiotic strain and found in several different products. Also, Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, super organism that's very helpful to modulate inflammation. And then there's like so many that are for different things like hydrogen sulfide or constipation or methane production, So I'm much more like a wizard that kind of uses strain specific probiotics for different reasons and not just like, well, here's a probiotic, let's see what it does.
That's what I was going to say then. I was going to say, like for the average listener who's getting some gut issues, could you recommend like a prebiotic? But then I guess, you specialize you adapt to the person, right? So it's just too complex.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, that's totally fine. You literally, I've just realized what the time is now. We did 2 more quick questions. I was just going to say, ask you what your thoughts were on like different types of fasting and intermittent fasting, because this is just from my own personal experience. That's the only thing I do. I'm accustomed to fasting as well. I've been doing intermittent fasting for years and it works really well for me, my lifestyle, and I feel better, my energy levels and whatnot. But when I do get gut issues, like now, for example, I'm towards the end of a fast. This is a bit extreme. This never really happens, but this is like about maybe 19, 20 hours into a fast because I've had gut issues. And that is the only thing that seems to really work every time, really, when I just basically stop putting stuff in there. But yeah, what are your thoughts on fasting and
yes, great question. And therapeutic fasting has been in our tool belt as naturopathic doctors for a very long time. We do it for any sort of inflammatory reaction. If you have rheumatoid arthritis and you're in an acute flare, and if you go on a water fast, for a few days, there's nothing that can stem the inflammation as quickly as that, in my experience. And intermittent fasting has become more and more popular because of Michael Mosley's book, The 5-2 Diet, and all that, which is great. I love it too. It's fabulous.
His book, is great.
Yeah. And the idea of periodically resting the system is a fantastic way to get rid of the old and do some cell renewal. And there's some incredible research by Dr. Longo. He's an Italian researcher on therapeutic fasting for those who want to take it a bit further. It's really incredible because he looks at the different inflammatory mediators, he tracks them, and he does it especially for during chemotherapy, for example. And I've recommended it for some of my patients that were undergoing chemotherapy, and they had like zero side effects when they actually did a 24 to 48 hour fast before the chemotherapy, which is so difficult mentally, but they had zero side effects, which was incredible.
Do you think that's mainly to do with the is it autophagy, where the immune system kind of reproduces? Do you think it's mainly to do with that, or is it probably several factors?
Well, autophagy, as we call it. But
I can't pronounce it.
Autophagy is probably another way to pronounce it, tomato. But it's sort of like, it's just a process where the body consumes itself. And that is also what happens. But I think more like the side effects mitigation due to fasting is probably more due to that you're really completely resting any sort of energy going out for digesting and for immune activation, so that you can really just focus on processing the extremely toxic substances that are chemotherapy, right? So that's part of it. I think the autophagy comes in, I think, independent of the chemotherapy, obviously. And the wonderful thing with therapeutic fasting is that it selectively looks for damaged cells as a first source of fuel for itself, right? So that's the wonderful thing of rejuvenation with fasting, and that effect is really pronounced as you go, as the days progress. The one most important thing that people really don't respect with therapeutic fasting is that you must rest, right, during the process. If you're out there working out and doing your thing, you're actually negating some of the effects of therapeutic fasting.
Just more stress, isn't it?
Yeah. So you actually have to respect your body to try to renew itself, right? And that energy, you probably have seen it. Initially, your energy goes up, but that as it goes on, you're really getting tired. And that is important to allow your body to actually, use that little energy to repair itself.
Awesome, yeah. Because I'm actually lying really, because when I say fasted, I still have like one or two black coffees, so that's not quite the same, is it, as fasting anyway?
Well, black coffee is a non-caloric substance, but it is a part of fasting. You're correct.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And literally, this is the last question. I just wanted to say, in terms of the clients, I don't know how many clients, probably lost count, lots of different clients you've actually dealt with. Have you noticed the people have managed to, for example, lose weight and body fat and actually improve their state of health in terms of like weight loss and stuff like that, as well as other factors of their life once they've repaired their gut?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would say the main thing is individualizing the diet, right? So really finding what makes your body sing and what makes it be as vibrant as possible. And, for some it is a vegetarian diet and for some it isn't. And so I'm never married to one idea of this is the diet for everyone. I think there are individual or individualities there. Yep. But definitely curbing inflammation is probably the biggest factor for people when they have very stubborn weight loss issues, where they can't get rid of the pounds. And so food sensitivities, inflammation, eating the wrong diet, and also I look at hormones, of course. If there's no reason, I have a few patients that are just really stubborn with weight loss. And I'd say the number one reason is that their detoxification system, I have had at least probably, I don't even know now over the years, probably hundreds, but in the recent times, there were probably about 5 or 6 that had very, very impaired detoxification mechanisms, and they just couldn't lose. Every time they even went on a diet, they got sick. And so, that's a bit extreme, and that's not everyone, but I'm a big fan of individualizing each treatment for each client or patient.
Great. Right. That's great. I just realized that's like an hour of your time. I really, really appreciate that.
No worries.
That was like literally, there was so much helpful information. You pretty much covered everything and more that I was going to ask you. So thanks a lot for that. And I was just going to ask you where the audience can find you online, I guess.
Sure. So I have a lot of different web presences, but my clinic is called the Biome Clinic.com, and they are, we're in northern New South Wales in Australia. That's where I have other practitioners work here. If you are looking for somebody that specializes in gut health, we do Skype visits and all that. And also I have my sort of professional education website is called thesibodoctor.com. And there's quizzes and free handouts and lots of information. And you can find me on Facebook on thesibodoctor.com, or SIBO Test is another thing, another business where we actually sell breath test kits to help diagnose SIBO. So I'm sort of everywhere, even awesome. Instagram, even though I'm 50 plus and I'm just learning about Instagram. So, I'm just figuring that out. And so I'm just foraying into that. But yeah, there's a lot of great information on all these different sites if you wanting to get more information.
That's great. I'll add the links for your site and for Instagram and Facebook onto the show notes anyway, so the listeners can access that. But yeah, once again, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, Nirala.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much.